My guest today is Mike Greenberg. He's the founder and CEO of Proofpoint Marketing, LLC. As with so many marketers, Mike tells me he pretty much fell into the profession. His original plan was to be a graphic designer and creative director. But after several internships, including one that exposed him to digital marketing back in 2005, he was hooked and never looked back. At this point, Mike says he's pretty much been there and done that with just about every marketing discipline and tactic under the sun. But his strengths lie in tying marketing strategy to business strategy, customer research, and content strategy and distribution. So in today's interview, Mike focuses on relationships, including what are the biggest issues and mistakes he sees in B2B marketing today. And a lot of these are relationship based. How do you measure the ROI of relationships? Why relationships over revenue? And how do you know whether you're building the right relationships? Let's jump right in. Okay, Mike Greenberg, I'm so excited to talk to you today because the whole thing, I kept thinking about, how to approach the topic we're going to jump into today. And I feel like it's one of those things that's kind of come full circle. So before I even get into that, I want to ask you, so you've been in digital marketing since 2005. Do you still love it? And if so, what makes you stick with it? What has made you stay in the business for so long?
I actually love the question. So the way I generally describe myself is I love problem solving and I just happen to do it through marketing. I don't even like it digital, not digital, whatever. It's just marketing. So I love it because I get to have conversations like this. I get to talk to a lot of people and I get to help solve problems. It's solving all sorts of interesting problems. I just happen to do it through marketing.
I would think too, it's never the same, right? I mean, you have all different, because to stick with something, the same thing, being in the same business or, niche for so long, there's got to be things that challenge you or you're not going to stick with it, right? So I was just wondering because it's, I was reading off all the different marketing that you've done and it's like there's so much that you have been into. And so the thing I wanted to jump into today, and why I say I think this has come full circle is, back in the day, you would hire a company or you would talk to your friends about who would you recommend for whatever it is you're looking for. Like I work with a manufacturing company and I do a lot of research as a copywriter. I dive into, their customers, obviously, and what people say about the business. And not a single person in this group used any social network. Like nothing, not even LinkedIn. A couple of them had a LinkedIn profile, but that was it. And I said, well, how do you if this company was no longer in existence, how would you start over? And they all said the same thing. I would pick up the phone, I'd call people. So it's about relationships, but it seems like, in a way we've gotten away from that, especially when COVID hit and we literally just couldn't be in that world with everybody else. And so now it's like, it almost seems like a novelty to be in a live event or, being in like that one-on-one kind of situation. And so what can you tell me about the importance of relationships in marketing? Do you agree with what I said as far as it just it's almost like relationships 2.0 or something?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I think a lot of the same concepts that used to play in the past still play in the sense of you're talking about people saying they'll pick up the phone. Now people, maybe they send a DM or something like that. So the medium is different. The concept's still the same. Concept is still that you trust your peers. And I think that's always been there. The difference is in the past, it was really that it's still your network, right? Like your network still matters. But in the past, your network was, okay, I've got my Rolodex. And that's my network. And the bigger the Rolodex, the better to a certain extent. Now, the network matters, but your network is much broader, right? I mean, think about LinkedIn, think about communities, think about the fact that a lot of people are remote within organizations. Right? Sometimes that's a barrier, but if you do it right, it actually helps more people get connected even within organizations. I mean, can't tell you how many times we have clients who are, large organizations. We're talking thousands of people and they're mostly in office and they don't even know that they have a peer across the pond that does the thing that they need, right? Versus we work with other clients who are very large, but remote environments, and they actually know most of the people they work with somehow, right? Because it's easier it's both harder and easier to connect with people, I think, in a digital first environment. So like, again, going back to your question, I think the concepts are still the same. I think you still, even back then, you trusted your peers. And I think you still do, but it was harder to get at all the peers you needed to answer all your questions because your network was maybe 100 people, something like that.
Right.
Right. I mean, how big can somebody's Rolodex really be of people that they can call? Even now, if you think about it, there's a lot of people whose numbers I either A, don't have, first of all, but that's a different story. Let's assume I even did somehow have their phone numbers. I don't know that I have to come from calling most of them. I don't know them. But sending them a DM on LinkedIn. I mean, I've messaged literally virtually complete strangers and asked them questions. Like there's been a number of times where I heard something on a podcast episode from other agency owners, let's just say talking about a problem that I am also experiencing. And I go, oh, well, this person has done it. I'll just message them. Right. I've never talked to them before. Like, hey, heard you talk about XYZ on your show. I'm sure you're busy, but if you could spare a couple of minutes, like, I'm curious, what did you do about this thing in more detail? 99% of the time, don't respond.
That's interesting. That's what I do with you. And we had never spoken. And I had heard you on a podcast or something. And I said, I love the topic. And so, and it's a little scary at first because even though you have, some common ground, you feel like you do, or you might, it's still somebody you don't know. And they could just ignore you.
I mean, the fear of rejection is always there. I feel like that fear of rejection is, I'm not sure that I don't know the psychology behind it per se, but it's definitely less or decreased in the digital environment than it is in this in-person environment. I think that's a big part of the reason why, online dating took off and stuff. And people were like scared to talk to people in bars and whatnot, but sending them a message over whatever, oh, that's easy. You can do that.
Right. What's the worst they could do is just ghost you, even though,
yeah, there's a good and a bad. I mean, I know we're getting probably off topic in terms of kind of societal factors there, right? I mean, it also is, I think, a big part of the reason why people are as divided as they are now, because it's, that proximity or the absence of that proximity is, I think, stifling to good communication on the flip side too. But
yeah,
I think there's the good and the bad.
Yeah, I guess with everything, it's like that. There's so much about, like on LinkedIn, for example, I mean, people hit you up all the time as soon as you connect, and then you have to brace yourself for who's going to pitch me right off the bat without even knowing, because that's been happening to me more and more. You probably get that a lot too. I love your approach though, when you ask a question that the person is familiar with. I mean, you're putting the ball in their court, and if they don't answer you, well, it's not like they reject. Maybe they just are busy, or I don't know. It's just easier to not take it so personally, I think, but do you see like a big mistake, since you have all this marketing background with different aspects of marketing? Is there a particular issue or mistake that you see in B2B today?
I don't know if it's controversial or not. I'm not going to pretend like it's a hot take per se, but I think I have a slightly different opinion than like a lot of people. Is a lot of the things that are out there right now are just over index for VC funded tech company that creates this insane pressure on top line revenue. And then you hear that's a big part of the reason why you hear everybody talking about, marketing should be responsible for revenue and this thing. I don't disagree with the general concept, right? I do think marketing is a revenue driver. Totally agree with that. But making revenue be the only and main thing that you so dogmatically focus on, I think is actually a mistake. The framework that we've developed and we like to use is, rather than talking about, sales velocity or revenue velocity, we'll talk about relationship velocity. And that's kind of getting at your question, like, where do relationships play in? If you think about, I would say the vast majority of organizations out there, even private equity or self-funded, they don't operate under the same rules or the same objectives as a VC-funded tech firm does. They're generally more about controlled growth rather than, growth at all costs. I think for that to work, like if you rather than having a 1 year, 2 year time horizon that you're looking at a 10 to 30 year time horizon or something like that, right? You're in this for the long run. I mean, and this is how we think about our own business. You can make very different decisions.
Right.
And relationships matter that much more. And on top of that, if you think about, there are a ton of service-based companies out there, right? That's anything from, say, like pretty much any consulting group out there is a service organization, right? It's lawyers, it's dentists, it's construction, it's consulting groups, it's T firms, et cetera. I mean, there's, I don't know the number, but hundreds of millions of them out there. I mean, it's hundreds of millions, but tons, right? And in those industries, even more specifically, it's even more about relationships. And then you look at other industries like, say, healthcare, or not even just outside of consulting, like healthcare and even med device, right? All of those businesses are also very heavily built on relationships. I mean, most med device companies are still kind of this person to person. I'm knocking on doors. It's the salespeople, et cetera. Now it's a lot harder now post-COVID, right? Because they can't get into hospitals anymore. Right. So there's a new challenge. So how do you do it? It's like, if you stop focusing on that relationship, you're not going to get it. I mean, that's the general concept is, I think, if you look at the fact that it's about relationships, it's really about a journey. Like when you're building a relationship, you're trying to take somebody as both an individual, if you're a salesperson or an AE or whatever, or a brand, an organization, you're trying to take them from being a complete stranger to being a trusted source. Right. That's your goal. And it's no different than if you're trying to develop a friendship with somebody, right? You're trying to take them from, like, you meet somebody in a bar, you meet somebody online or whatever it is at an event. And if you're interested in them, whether that's in a romantic way or just in a platonic way, whatever it is, you're trying to go from being a complete stranger to having it be somebody that you trust and you want to hang out with, et cetera. And it's really no different. The concepts are the same.
Right. And that makes sense. It's like, I always use the analogy, because I know you're a big workout guy. I used to be a personal trainer for like 20 years. And so I'm always at the gym. And I find that if I go to a new gym, because we recently moved here to Arizona and I didn't know anybody, I will spend a lot of time, and I'm an introvert too, so I'm not going to go up to somebody. And it's like the equivalent of going on LinkedIn and just cold pitching somebody. I want to see how people interact. I want to see the lay of the land. And then the people who are there when you go at the same time, it's like on LinkedIn, if you post the same time every day, which I don't always do, but you'll see the same people and you'll get you'll get to know them that way before you actually approach them. So in a social network, it would be commenting, like on LinkedIn, so that okay, this person's commenting a lot on my posts. What are they about? And at the gym and on a one-on-one basis, it's like, well, they're here all the time. So then you start saying hi. And then, hey, introduce yourself. And it's the same thing, like what you just said, right? Is there a mistake that do you think people jump into it too much? Like I talked about, they call it pitch slapping, where.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's interesting you bring up the moving. We are also new Phoenicians, if you will, but been here a couple of months. And my wife and I actually were just talking about this in the car the other day. And the same concepts that we employ the same framework that we employ for our customers plays on the personal level. And what you were talking about is, people just jump right in. You never walk up to somebody, you walk in a new gym and you say, hey, you want to get married? Like,
or you want to work out?
Are you? Like, it's to a certain extent, the same thing, right? Or probably a slightly better example in your case, like nobody knows who you are right now, right? Or when you first walked into that gym, let's assume you were still in the personal training space. You would just walk up to somebody and just start telling them, well, you're doing this wrong and you should actually do this, and this. Like, who the hell are you? Why are you talking to me? Right? Like, you never do that. You try to build some sort of relationship first and try to get them to maybe see that you know what you're doing. And then, maybe you bring in a friend or a significant other, whatever, and train them in. So people say, oh, this person does know, they not only know what they're doing, they know how to do it. And then when you walk up to somebody, let's just say, and say, hey, how's it going? Now maybe they ask, oh, hey, I've seen you around, you're a personal trainer. Oh, actually, yeah. So you can, on a personal level, that's how you would approach that. Mm-hmm. And it's really no different on a B2B marketing side, whether you're doing it as an individual or you're doing it as a brand. And I think, you mentioned comments, but the goal is conversation. And there's like 4 types of conversation. I think you can try to spark conversation within your target accounts. But on the B2B side, it's how can you create opportunities for multiple people in your target audience to not necessarily talk about you, but talk about subjects that you're an expert in that maybe relate to you.
Creating a Slack group or something, would that be
Again, it could be a Slack group, but it obviously has to be, that's the technology behind it. It could be the chat in a webinar you're running. It could be the chat in a live event you're running. It could be a networking portion of a live event that you're running. It could be your customer advisory board. There's no set playbook here per se. Like, this is also somewhere people get lost. Like, oh, well, it has to be a Slack group for a community. Well, it can be, it doesn't have to be, right? One-to-one conversation, that one's pretty straightforward. And then one-to-few conversations. And this is where, again, that could be things like ABM and advertising, and again, events kind of play into that thing as well. But if you think about relationships as a framework, there are 5 kind of micro decision points that you're going to have multiple times along the journey, right? So if you think about, the usual kind of way that people describe the journey, it's, awareness, consideration, decision, loyalty, advocacy. There's a lot of folks that we'll talk about right now, like, oh, that doesn't matter, it's an old concept, etc. I will argue that it matters in the way that the journey still exists. You just don't know which stage somebody's at. So pretending that you do, that's the incorrect. But it's a good framework, I think, to understand what's happening rather than to map things to per se. Right. But within each of those steps, you can have these 5 micro decision points, which are excitement, which can be exhibited either internally or externally. You can be internally excited, like in your head, or externally, like, oh my God, this is awesome. And you tap your thoughts about it. There's skepticism, which is going to be internal, like self-talk, either positive, usually, negative in this case, since we're talking skepticism. Questioning, which is external. So you're going to go to a friend, a colleague, or whatever, and be like, hey, I'm not so sure about this. Or, hey, I just experienced this thing. Becoming convinced, that's internal again, right? So you've internally convinced yourself, yep, this is the right thing. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep moving forward. And then committed, that's external. Like, hey, team, we're going to pursue this course of action. Kind of thing. And then it goes again, right? So that you have those five micro decision points in your awareness stage. And then again, you go back to excitement in the next stage, and it keeps going that way. And if you think about it, I can illustrate that on a personal level. I can illustrate it that for, any single industry you want to bring up. So on a personal level, you're married, right? So if we talk about, at some point you got introduced to your now husband, right? You got excited about it. Like, hey, this guy seems great. And whether that was online, whether that was through a friend.
We met online. Actually, it was 1999 when no one did that. So we didn't even talk about it for years.
So there you go, right? So you got excited. Somebody sent a message, you got excited about it, right? Like, oh, wow, this person seems cool. Let's go on a date, etc. And then maybe something happens, and maybe their fashion style just didn't fit. And you're like, man, this guy seems great, but I don't know. I don't know that I want to be seen with somebody who looks like that, or that wears these kind, whatever. It's a silly example, right?
No, it's not. It's so appropriate. I'll tell you later.
So again, maybe this is, but see what I mean? Right. And then day's over and you are having this like potentially negative self-talk. Like, hey, this is great, but I don't know. This is weird. Right. Now, maybe he did something. Maybe he sent you a text. Maybe he sent you flowers. Maybe whatever it is that made you realize, you know what? Clothes aside, like, great guy. Worst things come to worst. I'm going to at least go on another date. Right. Now, let's assume it was really bad. Like, I don't know, maybe he was wearing a Hawaiian shirt. I don't know, whatever. Right. And, then you meet up with a friend for drinks later and you're like, God, I went out with this guy but his clothes, I don't know. Right. And then at that point, at either of those points, either you tell yourself, yeah, you know what? Not going to happen. Or your friend goes, yeah, I don't know, that's just weird. And you're like, yeah, forget it. I'm done. Or that your friend convinces you, say, yeah, you know what? Are you crazy? Like, seems like a great guy. Just, you can fix the clothes later. Right. And then you get excited and then you're committed, and then et cetera. And then you get excited again for the next date, and it just keeps going and going and going. And then you get to wedding day. Everybody gets the wedding day jitters, the cold feet, whatever you want to call it. You're going to question it, at least just for a split second. It happened to me. But then same thing, right? Most likely by then you're internally going to convince yourself you don't have to talk to them. Right. Maybe you do. The same thing happens in the B2B, right? You get excited about a problem or solution that maybe somebody can solve. Maybe you saw an ad. Maybe you heard a podcast. Maybe you attended an event and you heard a a talk. Maybe you saw somebody talking about this company or the solution in a community, right? Whatever it is, or in a chat somewhere. And that gets you excited. And then you go and maybe you do some research. And then you, again, from there, depending on your priorities and things like that, you're going to evaluate, like, is this worth it? Are there, do they seem trustworthy? Things like that. And then you're probably at some point, whether it's at stage 1 or stage 2, whatever it is, you're going to ask your team, like, hey team, anybody heard of, company XYZ? Now, hopefully by then you've penetrated the account enough where they say, oh yeah, I've heard a lot of great things about that. And again, same kind of thing. You get down to the decision point, you're about to sign the contract. I don't care what it is. If you're signing, especially if it's a multi-million-dollar deal, right? Whatever. Let's assume you're a med tech company and you're signing a contract with a engineering firm to develop your next iteration of your product. That's $1 million project. You're going to be quite like, and they're new, you've never worked on this before. You're going to be going, man, am I really going to stake this next round of funding on them? Because that's what you're doing. All right. You're going to question it no matter what.
Yeah.
Right. So, and it's that thing. So it's about understanding emotionally, what is your customer going through at each of those micro decision points? And how do you create experiences and content and where, right, to combat that? Specifically, like if we think about what we want to influence, one of the main things is how do your effectiveness at getting past that initial internal skepticism. The better you can be at that, the faster you're going to build that relationships. It's all about that relationship philosophy.
That's such a great point, because to realize that skepticism is a natural part of that decision-making process is super important. And even in copywriting, there's 2 things that brought to mind what you were saying. One is the switch, which is the fact that everyone is switching from something when they decide to go with you, whether it's from doing nothing, even like if it's a SaaS company, it could be, pen and paper to a digital product. I mean, it could be that, or it could be switching from another software, and that's why a lot of these software companies, they have a trial period and they have a 7-day free trial. And so this way you can try it. What I do with new clients is I have them do we'll do a small email sequence. It's typically what I do. If they're looking at, I want you to do my whole website, but I've never worked with you before. So it's important then what you're saying is to have something in that's lined up to address each of those those minor, like micro decisions, so that they don't get stuck there and then they don't do anything. Right. So yeah, that's so interesting, because it's something that you don't really think about. When you're marketing your product, it's like, okay, well, I have this great product and they're just going to love it and they're going to, it's like, there's so many stages before they get there. And obviously the bigger the investment, the longer these decisions take as well. So yeah.
100%. It's interesting you bring that up, because I think with products, I would say that's one of the biggest pitfalls I see founders and marketers fall into, which is like, oh, we don't have competitors. First of all, you do, even if they're not direct. But let's assume you're so innovative that there is nobody else doing that thing. Right? You're totally new to the market. You've created a brand new category. It does not exist. You are still competing against the status quo. I know you and I talked about that initially before we recorded, right? It's that status quo could be anything. They have a solution to this problem already of some sort. Right. Now, it might be a really, really awful solution, but it's there and they're kind of skating by, if you will. Right. It could be pen and paper. It could be spreadsheets. It could be some sort of manual process for pulling data or whatever it is. I mean, it could be it could be cheap overseas labor through, work or something that they are doing a whole bunch of manual stuff and it works for them, whatever. But they're doing something about it already. And that cost of switching from something to something you don't know is mentally a huge hurdle that everybody has to get over. And the sooner you do it and the more you understand it and the more you understand the specifics of that hurdle, right? So it could be, hey, have you been burnt before? Have you tried to switch in the past?
Like just address it head on. And then,
well, yeah, because again, this is one of the things where research is key to any of this. I mean, it's key to marketing in general, but for this framework to work, you have to understand the customers really, really deep. And it's that kind of the emotional side of things that's often missed, right? People talk about, firmographics, demographics, and this, that, and the other. And a lot of people talk about, well, yeah, kind of the general concept of people buy with emotions and justify with logic. But nobody really talks about, well, what do you do about that? At least most people don't talk about it. I think one of the best things you can do in saying like a customer interview when you're trying to understand customers is ask a question like, hey, what was the last time you switched vendors? Or tell me about the last time you switched vendors for anything. It doesn't matter what it was. And you're going to get one of two answers. They're either going to tell you about the most amazing switch they've done or about the worst switch they've done. And in both are valuable. And what you want to do is then ask follow-ups. Okay, well, if this was so great, tell me what was so great about it? What did they do to make this an awesome switch? So now you know what good looks like. Right. And they said, just out of curiosity, well, have you ever had a bad one? Everyone's got one. Everybody has a story where they got burnt. What made it so bad? Like what happened then? If you can understand those things, you can now start addressing that cost of switching in your marketing, in your messaging, both on the marketing and the sales side.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. And so what is it so you know what you're up against? Like for me, I ask people, have you ever worked in copywriter before? And almost everyone says yes. What happened? Did something go wrong? Sometimes nothing went wrong. We're just like, well, the person just isn't available anymore or whatever it was. But sometimes there's something very specific, like they didn't get the voice right, or they didn't, whatever it is. And then I dig into that. So I make sure I don't do that. And so it's the same with any other product or service. It's like, I remember switching from one software to another. And the thing that made me do it was that the new software company said, we will take all of your, we'll do all I forget what the term is. They took all my data and put it into theirs. And I know they regretted it because it was a huge, giant mess. And they kept coming back with me with questions. And this was years ago when I had a different business. But that was what made me switch to them. And I did stay with them for a while. But those sorts of things overcame for me the thought that I would have to put all this together and do it. And they knew in advance that this was a huge obstacle. So that's awesome. And so where do relationships come in? This is my last question, just really, how does all this weave into relationships when it comes to making this sort of decision?
Well, again, I think it goes back to what I was talking about. It's understanding those micro decision points and where you can and can't influence. So I talked about one, right? You can influence your effectiveness of getting over that initial skepticism, right? You have to understand what people are likely to be skeptical about. Right? Are they going to be skeptical about how quickly you can do something? Are they going to be skeptical about the ROI that you're promising? Are they going to be skeptical about the price? Are they going to be skeptical about whatever your expertise? Depending on the business you're in, there's going to be different things that people generally or commonly become skeptical about. So you need to understand what those are to be able to address that up front. You can address that through marketing. You can address that through sales messaging at that point. For example, on the marketing side, if you know what those are, let's assume they are skeptical about the speed at which you can have an impact. Well, you can have case studies and testimonials that focus on speed. You can have podcast interviews that where you talk about how to do this faster. You could have an event that's focused on that. Maybe that's like the speed of software implementation, whatever it is, things like that. And from a sales perspective, it's using some of that same content for sales enablement. It's having the messaging right to talk about it and just addressing it up front, right? So it's sort of like address the elephant in the room right away. Like, hey, you know what? You jump in the discovery, maybe once you know a little bit more about the business, before you even start talking about it, so like, hey, you know what? I know that there's probably some hesitation about how quickly can something like this be implemented. Well, let me put your mind at ease by talking about X, Y, and Z first. Mm-hmm. So you just jump right into it before they even have the chance to think about it and ask the question. The other thing you can influence is how you handle rejection, right? So again, at that internal skepticism and the external questioning, somebody can pop out of of that journey, if you will, right? They're like, yeah, you know what? Not the right time, not interested, not not top priority, whatever it is. What you want to focus on there is you want to go for a not now. Right now. And again, if you think back to the relationship journey, you're going to have positive experiences, you're going to have negative experiences, right? I'm sure you think about it personally. At some point, I'm sure your husband did something like, oh my God, really? Right? It happens. I've done stupid things in relationships, plenty. But hopefully the rest of it is good enough where you're like, okay, we're going to keep going. Right? So you want that kind of not now. And usually it's not now because not the right time, don't have budget commitment, don't have the right authority, don't have whatever it is. Right? Because if you have that, now you can keep the conversation going and still build the relationship. Right. And then at that point, your objective becomes, how do I get them excited again? Right. That could be inviting them in your podcast. That could be inviting them to speak at your event. It could be inviting them into your mastermind group. It could be co-creating some content with them, involving them in your industry research, whatever. A million different ways to do it. The other thing is you can influence the source of the relationship. Right. So usually we trust our peers and friends. Right. So if you think of it from a personal perspective, you and your husband met online. My wife and I met online. However, we met online, but as it turned out, we had a number of people in common. She found that out. And before we went on our first date, she reaches out to her friend, Emily, and goes, hey, I want you to tell me everything you know about this guy. Right. And they did. They went out, and obviously we're now married. It all went well. But that made her go, okay, yeah, I trust this. I'm going to go on this first date. Had that not happened, maybe she would never, maybe we would be having a very different conversation right now. Okay. So that source of the relationship matters. And on the B2B side, this is where it's about, I talk about like building the relationship pyramid. So you have your decision makers, everybody wants to go there, but then you have your internal influencers and external influencers. And each of those has their teams, especially in large organizations, and then their external influencers. So you want to build that entire pyramid because what you want ideally is a warm intro. Right. So there's ways to do that in marketing. There's ways to do that in sales, et cetera. And then that gets us into multi-threading. Right. And if you think about earlier, we were talking about the concept of different types of conversations. Well, you can multi-thread through advertising. For example, you can have some of your ad spend go a couple of levels down from your decision maker. So let's assume you're targeting the VP of R&D or the chief medical officer. Well, maybe you got to go after some biotech engineers at these tech companies or something like that, right? And show them more thought leadership stuff so that they trust the information source. And then they start sharing your content internally. Or maybe they overhear a conversation. Oh, we're looking for a new vendor for blah, blah. Oh, hey, you should talk to so-and-so. Either the person or the brand, right? So things like that. And then there's also things you can't control. And I think is just as important as a thing, or not control, but influence, which is, I think, just as important, if not more important to understand as the ones that you can. One of the main ones is that time between skepticism and questioning. You can't control that. That can happen in 30 seconds, right? So let's assume you do a demo. And as soon as you jump out that demo, and maybe you only had one person on that demo, they're in their mind going to go, not so sure about this. And right away, they pop a message in a Slack that, hey team, I just had this demo with so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. What do you think? Right? You can't control how quickly that happens. Or it might take months or years, right? It just depends on how big of a priority it is, all sorts of factors, right? Which gets us into, you can't control their priorities. I can't tell you how often I see this try to happen is people try to you can try to explain what you offer, your solution or your service or product fits into and supports one of their priorities, but you can't get them to add a new priority. Like if you're talking to a VP or even the CMO or the CTO or whatever, they've got their stuff handed down from the board and from the CEO. These priorities are set. You're not going to convince them, like the likelihood of you convincing them to add a new priority onto the list to displace another, not going to happen. Yeah, it's not going to happen. Right. So understanding what those typical priorities are. And then I already kind of mentioned this, but You can't control what stage someone decides to contact you at. It's the other, like people try to map, like, oh, well, at this stage, this gets handed over to sales. And at this stage, we're going to do this type of content. Like, no, you just don't know what's going to influence, what's going to actually get somebody excited at what stage. And at what stage you're going to start to reach out to. Like the example I think that I give is I've reached out to people, to sales right away in instances where the convenience of just, you know what, I don't want to bother looking for information. It's an insanely busy time. I know I need to solve this problem. I heard about you. I just want to talk to somebody. Like, I don't care the information. I don't care that the pricing's on your site. It doesn't matter. Just talk to me. I want to know in 15 minutes whether you can do what I need. I don't want to do my own research. On the flip side, sometimes I have more time and I don't want to waste my time talking to somebody and being sold to, and I'd rather take it slow. You don't know what preference, and that preference could differ based on, what stage of the organization they're in, who the person is, what else is going on in their life, like all sorts of stuff.
Deadline. They have something. Yeah, immediately. They have immediate. Exactly.
And the last thing you can influence is how people actually make their decisions. Like you could kind of give them maybe another criteria to consider, but you can't make them change it. Not very likely. It's no different than having them add another priority. It's like you usually have a set of criteria they're going to evaluate you on, and that's it. So the best you could do is understand what those are rather than try to add a new.
Right. Yeah. And especially as, speaking as myself as an outsider, I don't even know within a company, the conversations that are going on. And so I often hear, well, the team said this, and sometimes the team isn't like, I get involved in their marketing team once I'm in there, but until I'm in that spot, I don't know what meetings they're having, what they're saying, so it's even more out of my control at this point. Well, this has been really interesting. I really appreciate you gave a lot of great advice. Where can people find you and find out more about your company?
Best place would be on LinkedIn, Mike Greenberg. And then we do have a marketing podcast called The Master Marketer Show. So feel free to check that out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been great.
Yep. Thanks for having me.